Cmsn. I'm Andrew McAllister, the IEPR lead this year, and I'm sharing the podium with a couple of very distinguished guests here. Our Chair Weissenmiller, who represents us to the NRC, so that's and has a really long-term well of knowledge about this issue. Very much looking forward to having a conversation with him here today and with all of you. And our fellow commissioner from over to the PUC, Mike Florio, we're really happy to have him here with us today as well. And it's great to really have this engagement across agencies, and I think it really speaks volumes about how well we're working together and how important the issues that we're looking at are. I will keep it brief as far as opening comments here, but let's just say, the nuclear issue is a long-standing, highly important issue, and we all are aware of that. And things are looking today quite a bit different from what they did a couple of years ago and even a couple of weeks ago. So the issues we're going to talk about today have been really moving in real time. And I'm very much looking forward to hitting the sort of highest issues of highest importance here today. Obviously, there's lots of things we can talk about with the nuclear issue. We really had, I think, a hard time, figuring out what the best agenda looked like for today. We ended up extending it by half an hour, and trying to pack a lot into the day. And that's because really there's so many things to talk about. And in particular, much of the morning is going to get is going to treat the topic of decommissioning San Onofre and sort of what now that we've moved from having a plant that might or might not come online, at least partially, to having one that we now know will not come online. We need to sort of readjust our thinking and figure out what that's going to look like. So with that, I will pass it to Chair Weissenmiller for his comments, and Commissioner Florio after that.
Thanks, Commissioner McAllister. This actually represents sort of the next step in a string of IEPR reports dating back to 2005, where each year we have had a workshop on nuclear issues, 2005, 7, 9, and certainly in my tenure here we've had it each of the years. Obviously there's been a lot of talk about the nuclear resurgence or renaissance, and obviously at least one aspect of that has certainly been a resurgence of reports and analysis at the Energy Commission on nuclear. At one point when I first came, we had a nuclear office. We did some really pioneering work on nuclear waste, undergrounding nuclear power plants, etc. That disappeared in the 80s, and at this point, again, we have limited staff, but in terms of, this is a very important issue. As Commissioner McAllister indicated, I represent the state. As a liaison to the NRC, I've certainly been very busy interacting with them on the San Onofre issues, and at the same time certainly have talked to the chair there also on some of these issues. As you know, everyone knows she's a geologist, so certainly some of our seismic issues in California certainly capture her interest and attention. I think today's workshop is very important as we look at, again, where are we on the seismic issues. We made specific recommendations or earlier IEPRs. One of them was on basically using advanced technology, or at least advances in the technology since the original licensing period, on trying to understand the seismic faults around these plants. And we also at that point called out for the ISO to do studies that would give us a sense of how we could respond if there was a prolonged outage. And actually, at this point, I guess the news is, thank God they listened to us, did those studies, and now we at least have some of the outlines of how we will replace San Onofre in place. So again, certainly look forward to today's hearing. It's an important issue. Certainly appreciate Commissioner Florio being here, who's also found himself re-emerged in nuclear issues from probably much earlier decades.
Well, thank you, and thank everyone for being here today. It's a pleasure to join my Energy Commission colleagues again. As many of you know, I'm the assigned commissioner on the San Onofre investigation at the Commission, where we're dealing with rate-making issues, sometimes in mind-numbing detail. And so I'm looking forward to today as a chance to kind of take a step back from the weeds and really look at the big picture on nuclear, which we really aren't doing in our proceeding at the PUC. But I think, again, this coordination that we're building step by step is really essential in the complex energy environment that we're dealing with today. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot today and taking that knowledge back to our proceedings at the PUC. Thank you.
So thanks again, everybody, for coming. Looking forward to a great day, and I'll pass it back to Ned.
Great, thank you very much. Our first speaker is Joan Walter, who is the Energy Commission's Senior Nuclear Policy Analyst.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Commissioners, presenters, and everyone in the audience, and everybody listening remotely. I'm Joan Walter, the Nuclear Policy Advisor with the California Energy Commission. I'd like to thank everyone for coming here today to participate in this workshop and to discuss these important issues relating to nuclear power in California. Before we begin with our panels, I'd like to provide a little background on the AB 1632 report and the context for today's workshop. As of 2011, California had 2 operating nuclear power plants: Diablo Canyon, located north of Avila Beach in San Luis Obispo County, and San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, located south of San Clemente in San Diego County. As most of you are aware, just last month, Southern California Edison announced plans for the permanent closure of San Onofre. We will have an update from Southern California Edison on their closure plans in our first special report. California has a long history of seismic concerns related to the operation of Diablo Canyon and San Onofre. The state has completed a number of reports that recommend actions to address these concerns. Additionally, as a result of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, new recommendations for enhancing U.S. nuclear power plant safety have been put in place by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Panel 1 of this workshop provides an opportunity for the utilities to give us updates on their progress in implementing some of these recommendations. Panel 2 will include updates on seismic hazard analyses, state review of seismic research projects, and presentations on continued seismic uncertainties along the Central Coast and their implications for Diablo Canyon. Panel 3 will include the status and path forward for Fukushima lessons learned from the NRC, discussions of economic considerations for both internal and external, and a look at the causes and consequences of nuclear accidents. And finally, the last portion of the workshop will provide an opportunity to look at different perspectives on nuclear power, such as our second special report on thorium molten salt reactors, and our final panel, made up of representatives of public interest groups, for their perspective on issues related to nuclear power. Assembly Bill 1632 was signed into law in 2006, and it directed the Energy Commission to assess the potential vulnerability of California's large base load plants, that is Diablo Canyon and San Onofre, to a major disruption from a seismic event or plant aging, and to adopt that assessment as part of the Energy Commission's Integrated Energy Policy Report, or IEPR. The AB 1632 report was adopted in November of 2008, and the recommendations from the report were incorporated into the 2008 IEPR. Concurrent with the adoption of the AB 1632 report, PG&E announced the discovery of a previously unknown fault, the Shoreline Fault, less than a mile from Diablo Canyon. PG&E and the NRC have since concluded that Diablo Canyon's design would withstand potential ground motions from this fault. However, the fault's major characteristics are still largely unknown. We will receive more information on this in our second panel from Dr. Jean Hardebeck, who discovered the Shoreline Fault. The United States does not currently have a facility for the permanent disposal of spent nuclear fuel. Because of this, power plants across the country, including Diablo Canyon and San Onofre, have had to store the spent nuclear fuel they've generated at the plant until a permanent repository is approved by the federal government. The AB 1632 report identified that the spent fuel pools at San Onofre and Diablo Canyon have been re-racked to increase storage capability by placing the fuel assemblies closer together. While in conformance with NRC regulations, more densely configured spent fuel pools are considered to have a greater risk than those with a more open racking arrangement. The 2008 IEPR recommended, among other things, that further studies should be completed using advanced technology to help resolve remaining seismic uncertainties, and that the utilities should return their spent fuel pools to open racking arrangements as soon as feasible. However, in 2011, both PG&E and Southern California Edison reported that the inventory of spent fuel assemblies stored in the pools have not been returned to open racking. For San Onofre, Southern California Edison reported the inventory of the spent fuel pools to be almost double the original design capacity. And for Diablo Canyon, PG&E reported the inventory to be roughly 4 times the original design capacity. Furthermore, if Diablo Canyon is relicensed, PG&E plans to store the fuel assemblies generated through the relicensing period in the spent fuel pools, which would maintain close to the 2011 inventory level of 4 times the original design capacity. We will be provided with a lot more information about these important issues from each of our distinguished presenters. So without further delay, let's begin with our special report from Mark Nelson, Director of Integrated Planning and Strategy for Southern California Edison, on the status of San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station.
Good morning, IEPR Lead, Commissioner McAllister, Chairman Weisenmiller, and Commissioner Florio. I have with me Caroline McAndrews, who is Director of Strategic Projects for San Onofre, so she's from the site, and she can handle the hard questions. My name is Mark Nelson, and I am the Director of Integrated Planning for Edison. And now we're going to see if we can use technology and make this thing work.
If you need me to move it for you, Mark, I can do that.
Here. Love the engineer help.
Yeah.
Very good. I guess we can start here. That's fine.
Is this a,
Can you bring up the other presentation?
when you say the other presentation, Mark, I'm sorry.
The
which
other
one did you mean?
SCE presentation, please. Would be the briefing on the retirement plans. Okay, thank you very much. All right, we've conquered the technology, thank you. So, as announced on June 7th, we have stopped operations and retired both Unit 2 and Unit 3. We have sent the certification of permanent secession to the NRC. I'm sure that Chairman Weisenmiller has received that. And planning is underway now for permanent shutdown, the related activities and decommissioning. As you can imagine, it's a long and complex activity, and will take some time to get the planning fully understood and get the planning reports to the NRC. Units 2 and 3 ran for about 30 years, obviously with the support of many dedicated employees who we're now going to treat very fairly as we downsize and stop operations of the plant. And it simply became a case where, as our chairman Ted Graver said, the continuing uncertainty of getting restarted was so large, and we just couldn't overcome that and the odds of by end of year restart were thought to be 50-50 or less. So the decision was made to go ahead and retire the plant. So obviously, we will still take nuclear safety as the #1 activity on the site as we continue working. The key issues will be decommissioning, reduction in staff, and choosing appropriate staff to continue moving forward with decommissioning, the storage of used fuel, the seismic issues, and then once through cooling. And I'd like to talk at the end of this presentation a little bit about issues that the Chairman Weisenmiller just brought up in terms of what do we do to keep the grid reliable in the short run and in the long run for Southern California. So looking at decommissioning first, it will be a long process. It's expected that the planning will occur and then work will occur on radiological material, which will be put in the dry cask storage. This is all to be funded by the decommissioning trust. The current trust balance is $2.7 billion for SCE. We are continuing to evaluate both the cost of decommissioning and the timing of decommissioning as well, whether perhaps it could be accelerated. Staffing at the plant is currently at about 1,500 employees. That will be reduced to 400. That will obviously not be done all at once, but it will be done across the next year. We will be working through, again, the employee issues and treating the employees fairly. In some cases, we have union contracts, so we'll have to do negotiations there as well. So it will be quite an effort, but again, our #1 objective with the employees is they've been fair to us, they've been dedicated employees, we're going to treat them fairly as well. Looking at the used fuel storage on site, there are currently about 2,400 assemblies in the fuel pools and wet storage. There are about 800 assemblies that are currently already in dry cask storage. So roughly speaking, we're going to have to triple the size of the dry storage in order to eventually get everything out of wet storage. We will be defueling Unit 2 in July. Unit 3 was already defueled. So that activity should be done approximately, it should take less than a month, so I would assume it would be done toward the end of July. And then over the next 7 to 12 years, and they're in the process of analyzing that, obviously as part of decommissioning, that fuel would then be moved to canisters and put into ISPACs, or the bunkers that hold canisters. And in this case, the ISPACs will also need to be built. So again, we need to, roughly speaking, triple our current storage.
So just a quick question. Do you know or anticipate where those dry cask storage facilities, ISPACs, it'd be great to have that spelling. I'm sure the court reporter will need that. I guess, do you sort of have an idea of the long term where those things will likely sit?
Currently, the location of our interim spent fuel storage assembly units are on site in our North Industrial Area where old Unit 1 was. And there is sufficient room to store all of this fuel there.
Okay, that was my next question. Great.
As the CEC is well aware and the PUC has funded, we've had seismic activity underway. This activity was part of the reliability evaluation that was called for in AB 1632. We're currently evaluating the seismic activities that are underway, but it's unlikely at this point that they would be needed for nuclear NRC 5054F activity. So again, we're analyzing them. It's likely that those activities would be terminated. We do have an amount of seismic data that's been collected, and the question then is of analysis. So we will continue to work through those issues. But again, we're again looking at it very closely and also assessing what the impact of that work and that data would be on used fuel storage. So, again, that work's underway, but at this point, we believe, at least speculatively, we probably don't need to continue for NRC requirements. The plant was obviously once through cooled. There was a study underway, the OTC Nuclear Special Study at the State Water Resources Control Board, with the intent of determining whether on a go-forward basis after 2022, which was our shutdown date, end of original license, if we would need to find an alternate cooling from once through cooling. So at this point, since the plant will not be operating, we believe that there's no need for those studies. We will be talking to the State Water Resources Control Board about it. Additionally, the flows have been reduced, and at this point, only about 25% of the prior flow is required for the used fuel cooling. And there may be some need for cooling water during decommissioning. But again, that's an issue that we will work in decommissioning planning. So we'll determine what to do with that and where that goes, and we will be working with the Water Resources Control Board. Moving on to reliability. Obviously, since the event last January, we have been working hard on short-term reliability. We've been working with CAISO, the PUC, the governor's office, and we've put in a number of near-term fixes. There's only a limited amount of things you can do in the short term. They tend to be centered around demand response. They are centered around reconfiguration of transmission, addition of capacitor banks in order to add more reactive power to the system. So again, there's only a sort of finite amount of short-term activity that you can take. Last summer, we didn't have any outages. Last summer, we had a fairly significant under-voltage load shedding scheme, both for SCE and I believe San Diego had a remedial action scheme. And that was in the event that there was say a fire under a power line is probably one of the best ways to describe it, or multiple generating plants out. So we didn't have any incidents last year. This summer is a little bit different. We do not have Huntington Beach 3 and 4 operating as generators. They will hopefully be operating this summer as synchronous condensers, which means that they consume power rather than provide power, but they do provide reactive power for voltage stability. So again, margins are tight this summer under normal conditions. We should get through summer. Under extraordinary conditions, fires, et cetera, then we're more exposed to potential outages. Looking at the longer term, the service territory for Southern California Edison was largely built to be served by coastal power plants. So as a result, the transmission grid tends to run from the coast toward inland. So it was feeding, if you will, essentially coastal to the east. So with the once through cooling retirements from the Water Resources Control Board policy, most of those retirements in the LA Basin and the LA area would take place in 2020. The Water Resources Control Board has in fact indicated flexibility for system reliability purposes. So we recognize that, but in general, we'd be looking to retire about 6,500 megawatts. And with Song's retirement, that puts roughly an 8,800 megawatt hole in our resources in the basin. So it's a significantly different grid than what we had seen before. And there's a fair amount of work going on, obviously, with the CAISO in the CPUC's LTPP, and we are currently preparing for solicitations for fossil generation and preferred resources as part of this current LTPP. Some challenging issues we may face would be some of the 220 system in the basin may conceivably need to be upgraded to 500. 500 kV is a bigger, taller footprint, so that's a challenge. Some of the prior coastal units, the ones through cooled units, may face fairly stiff opposition being repowered. So that's a battle that's yet to be seen, but one of the local communities has already attempted, but not succeeded, but only by a handful of votes in changing the zoning of the Redondo generating station. So again, we would anticipate that there may be challenges there. And then it's interesting, I see as a non-attainment area, I guess now what I'm hearing is that AQMD has had EPA declare that LA is in attainment for PM10, federally at least. But in any event, AQMD Rule 1304 would be the operant rule that would allow for repowering of coastal units. And if either additional power is needed, there wouldn't be a sort of a path to offsets, or at least not a well-understood one at this point. And it also somewhat limits the location without commercial transactions to the AES sites, the coastal sites, because they are currently the holders of what would be the 1304. So again, there are challenges in the basin. I think they're reasonably well understood, and we're moving forward on them. So to solve this, we want to move first to a very aggressive use of preferred resources. And I think this will put us not only in a leadership position, but perhaps in a position of unknowns. As we move forward, we're anticipating using a pilot, and we have dubbed it a living pilot because it's not really a pilot where we want to start it, stop it, evaluate it, and move on. It's really a pilot where we want to learn throughout the pilot. What does it take to get higher saturations of demand response and energy efficiency? How do you do that? How do you get better customer acceptance? If you put DG, think solar PV on the lines, what happens at high saturations? How does that interact? How might inverter standards such as IEEE 1547 need to be modified? So there's really just a whole host of issues that we believe that a living pilot can really sort out. At this point, we believe we have authority from the CPUC and the LTPP for up to approximately 400 megawatts of preferred resources beyond what was mandated as the minimums. And we believe that we can focus those megawatts on preferred resources such as this living pilot. So, obviously we don't have funding and we need to come back for additional authority, but we believe we have a unique opportunity at this time. As I said before, we may wind up with new transmission, we may wind up with upgraded transmission. Electrically speaking, San Onofre being at the far south end of our system and the north end of San Diego system had a lot of unique ability to pass power between the systems. Potentially a 500 kV connection between SCE and SDG&E, that's one possibility. There's been a number of discussions about potentially pulling 500 kV into San Onofre, which would mean we would need to convert the substations there to 500. There'll be a number of challenges with that. Obviously, that all sits on leased land. So again, it's a relatively small footprint site, even on the east side of the 5, on what's typically called the Mesa. So there'll be a number of challenges there. And again, not to mention the typical resistance to siting 500 kV line or high voltage lines. And then some amount of targeted fossil generation for the inertia that it provides, for the ramping that it provides. And also, I view the targeted generation as a good way to backstop our ability to move to even higher levels of preferred resources. Because if we can determine where targeted generation would need to be, then we can go ahead and think about not building there, but having, say, AFCs, which is a process through the CEC to license, or at least be really site ready, so that in the event that we just can't get the preferred resources to materialize, or in the event that we can't get perhaps control of the preferred resources in the short run, we have the ability to build some amount of fast start, probably peaking equipment. So again, I see the targeted generation as really serving multiple needs. It serves the inertia need, it serves the resource integration need, and it also allows us to go ahead and try to go deeper into the preferred stack. And I think that speaking with panels like this and coming to the various state agencies is going to be increasingly important as we move forward, because there will be a host of players in this, and we will need the cooperation of many agencies in order to move forward. The Water Resources Control Board, in the event that reliability doesn't come together and we need some extensions perhaps on once the pooling. CAISO, obviously. We have a lot of work to do with CAISO on how do we use preferred resources? How do they count? What value can you get out of them? We want them to be valuable. So in order to be valuable, we need to work with CAISO and get a clear understanding between all of us as to how they can be used. Need determinations, we'll go through the LTPPs. Track 4, we'll take a look at songs out. Track the RFO process, I believe we need to get a compliance filing in July 15th, so the first 1,000, 1,200 megawatts will be moving along. Air permitting, right now we have Rule 1304 in the South Coast AQMD, but if generation's needed in other air basins, the path may be less clear because they don't have such parallel rules, so emissions offsets may be more challenging. I think local zoning, again, be another big issue, and whether it's an attempt to change zoning, such as Redondo Beach did, or whether it's just direct consumer objection to the repowerings. I think that's a very possible issue that has to be. So any road would require the cooperation of many agencies and many things to come together. And we frequently say that your choices are between generation and transmission, but the reality is you need all the preferred resources, you need all the transmission and all the generation, just in the event that some of it can't materialize. So I think you run all paths as contingency. Okay, thank you very much, and that concludes the report on San Onofre and the road forward as we see it now.
I have a couple, I can go first. First, I wanted to say, that certainly on behalf of myself, I think all of our commissioners, obviously one of the things we're trying to do is increase jobs in the state. So certainly, we want to emphasize our sympathy for the ex-San Onofre workers and hope that Edison will treat them properly and fairly, and that hopefully all of them will find comparable jobs going forward. Couple questions. One is, my recollection is part of your original permit with the Coastal Commission, you did a kelp wreath. What happens, if anything, to that mitigation measure now?
It's my understanding that the mitigation needs to go forward for the period of operation, so we'll be getting, again, it's my understanding we would be getting at a 30-year operation of mitigation.
Next question, I know there's been some speculation about possibly putting a synchronous condenser at San Onofre, or converting one of those units. Has that been done? What sort of issues are there? Is it just too early to talk?
You're absolutely right. There's been a fair amount of discussion about just the need for reactive power in that area. The Cal ISO approved 1 or 2 projects for SDG&E, because again, the plant is actually in SDG&E's territory. So they approved 1 or 2 projects that I believe were both synchronous condensers, standalone synchronous condensers, and SVCs. And San Diego is currently working on those projects. We also have been looking at the potential use of songs 2, 3, or both as synchronous condensers. So that analysis is still underway. We're in communication with San Diego. I discussed it with them, I guess as recently as last week. So we will certainly, work with them to see if that turns out to be a preferred option to the path they're going down now, or perhaps an option that is either parallel or an option that might be in addition to it.
Have any of the other nuclear plants in the U.S. been converted to synchronous condensers?
Yes, the Zion plant north of Chicago had about a 10-year run as a synchronous condenser. It's recently shut down, and they're moving toward full decommissioning.
Okay. Okay. How long does your lease go, and how does that affect its seat?
The current leases, to the best of my recollection, lasted through the license period, so 2022. So the intent, of course, had been that with license renewal, that would put us in a position to need to renew those leaseholds and figure out whether it was, again, 2042 or some future date beyond that. So that's part of the decommissioning and shutdown planning analysis that's currently underway. Would be what would be the next ask for some sort of lease arrangements.
Okay. And what percentage of the fuel has long-term contracts, or would come from long-term contracts?
I don't know. I can get that information for you. I'm not aware right now.
Okay.
Just one question. You indicated a period of 7 to 12 years to move the spent fuel to the dry cask storage. For a given fuel assembly, roughly how long does it need to sit in the pools before it can be moved to dry cask?
So that 7 to 12 years is that long leg of the last fuel assembly. So specifically, we shut down in January of 2012, up to 12 years for that last fuel assembly to ultimately make it to the facility.
But that's somewhat uncertain depending on the conditions.
It depends on the amount of heat that is generated by that spent fuel.
Thank you.
I do want to just point out, for the courtesy of the folks that are here, we are actually being filmed, so I just want to, people may, that is obvious, I guess, but I just want to make sure people were aware. We do actually tend to prefer that folks let us know so we can actually notice that it's likely to be filmed. That didn't happen today, but I wanted to just do it informally here. Obviously, at the commission, these are open public meetings, and that's perfectly legit. So our bias is towards openness and transparency, but just out of courtesy, wanted to let everybody know. So thanks.
Okay, I'd like to move on to the current cycle IEPR discussion. We received a data request with approximately 50 items in it. Logically, they can be broken up into 3 categories: the progress on reporting on the original 1632 report, the 08 recommendations, progress from 2011, and then other. Looking forward, we've just talked a little bit about used fuel. We'll obviously be continuing to work on that, issue. But again, the short story is by the end of July, we hope to have Unit 2 defueled. And then at that point, we'll need to work with dry storage. And again, we'll need more ISPCs. We think that with the retirement of the units, probably most of the IEPR questions probably aren't germane now to they were more targeted toward an operating plant, obviously. So we're in the process of sorting through that, but we think that most of the questions have probably been answered sufficiently to handle it up to retirement. We anticipate that during retirement, you'll probably have new questions. And as we understand retirement and decommissioning better, we'll be in a better position to answer those questions. Because again, that will be a different process. We do clearly have experience decommissioning with Unit 1, so we have a model to go by. There's other industry experience as well, and we want to leverage all that during the planning process. Things like station blackout, the evacuation for the operating plant, those are issues that we'll be working. Station blackout obviously isn't an issue for an operating plant now, but we still need to deal with power requirements of the used fuel pools. Unit 1 still has some groundwater remediation going on, and we'll be working that issue as well. So again, moving forward, you know, I anticipate that you might have some different questions that are different than they were for the operating plant. But we've submitted our responses. If you have specific questions, we do have some members of the team here that can answer those as well from the IEPR questions.
I mean, I think, you know, certainly this conversation has shifted a lot, and many interested parties on what the plan is for it, and I think uncertainty is sort of the name of the game at this point. Certainly looking forward, or looking from the outside in, you know, say if you're a member of the public. But a lot of the kind of, you know, critical questions, I mean, obviously there's the technical issue of how you decommission, what the various core stakeholders, you know, the military and SDG&E and Edison, and you know, your discussions with Mitsubishi and all that kind of stuff. I think will move forward, and we're all kind of on the edge of our seats, interested in how those discussions go. I guess you know, the ratepayer impacts of this seem like they're, from a public interest perspective, they really are front and center. And it's not my bailiwick here at the commission. It's really over with Commissioner Florio. Lucky man. Yeah. So I don't want to poach on that issue between commissions, but I am interested in sort of you know, hearing the overarching kind of framework about how you're going to approach those issues and what that looks like going forward, and maybe, you know, time frames if you have some ideas about that.
So is the question specifically on cost recovery?
Yes.
And Commissioner Florio obviously would be better at this maybe than I am, but the OII, the Order Instituting Investigation on San Onofre, is currently in 4 phases. Phase 1, I believe, is the recovery of costs for the year 2012. We were in a peculiar rate-making situation. We didn't have a GRC decision. Our 2012 GRC typically would have been expected at the tail end of 2011. Instead, it was late in 2012. And so all of 2012 costs were in a memorandum account, which is the typical rate-making. So we have had hearings on part of phase 1. I believe we still need to discuss the replacement power, which would be the ERA. So there should be hearings on that as well. That was typically recovered through ERA. And that's phase 1. Let's see. I believe that phase 2. Let's see. I'm drawing a blank here on PUC activity. I can go. I guess I can.
Continued rate base treatment or not.
Thank you. Phase 2 is really what we consider the PU code 455.5, which is the consideration by the commission as to whether or not the plant's in rate base. That's obviously taken on a different light at this point since we have in fact retired the plant. I would think that the discussion there would probably center around the removal of the plant that's already occurred.
The decommissioning charges that you know, we've all been paying, is there a relevant number here for how much has been collected on this? Is in the fund there?
At SCE's share, I believe, the collection is $2.7 billion. The overall decommissioning obligation, I believe, based on, again, estimates, is around $4 billion. The rest of that would be San Diego, Riverside, and Anaheim, who are the other co-owners. So we believe that it's reasonably well funded. We're funded at about 90%, I believe. And then the CPUC has two additional phases. One phase has to do with recovery of 2013 costs, and the other phase has to do with really a little bit more technical phase, I think, on the analysis of what happened with the steam generators. So I believe that's the process, and then the PUC ultimately, of course, will be working the issue of rate recovery.
Right, and on that final issue, I think, so there's likely to be a phase 5, 6, I guess. But that final issue actually has, global importance and certainly national importance. I mean, figuring out what happened so the industry can sort of learn from it. That's definitely true.
And I just add that, in the wake of Edison's announcement, President Peavy encouraged the parties to try to reach settlement on some of these rate-making issues. Certainly a sentiment that I second, and if the parties bring us a settlement, we'll try to process that expeditiously, and if not, this will be a fairly lengthy process. So trying to take it step by step so that parties can focus on a discrete set of issues at one time rather than one massive proceeding that's hard to keep all the pieces straight.
So with MHI, do you expect to go to litigation or arbitration?
I believe it has an arbitration clause, so at this point, we're still obviously in negotiations with them.
Great, thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.